This is a recently completed build. It's a Modern Classic 2 50-watt version, which has been built for my good mate Rick down in Tasmania. Hey Rick, how you doing? It has been built using our new version 2 board for the MCII, and amongst other improvements, it's now got a tube buffered effects loop. So most of the other PCBs that I've put out, for DIY builds, you normally have to, if you want to loop with it, you'll get one of the solid state loop boards that we sell. This one here though, tube buffered effects loop. So I am running it through an old SD3000 delay, which I've got down in the rack down here, and just putting it through its paces. So one of the interesting questions that I've read a lot about on forums and so on is, does a tube buffered effects loop in an amp like this make a difference to the tone if you switch the loop in or out? So there's a lot written and read about with respect to the Soldano, the SLO100, and whether the original tube buffered loop actually was part of the core tone of that amp. So what I thought I'd do is run a simple riff through a looper, and I can switch this tube buffered effects loop very easily just in and out on this amp. So do a quick A/B test. I will run through the schematic that is used for the effects loop on this board, have a little bit of information about that and some tips on how to wire it in if you are contemplating or are in the middle of building one of these Modern Classic amps using my PCB. Alright guys, catch up. Okay, well, if you made it this far into the video, I'm assuming that you're interested in learning a little bit more about how a tube buffered effects loop actually works. So just to orientate yourself around what's going on here, V5A and V5B, these are the two triodes within the same preamp tube V5. Right, so bear in mind, of course, that within each 12AX7 there's two triodes or two gain stages that can be utilized in your amp. The tube buffered effects loop is handled by V5 completely. So just to the left of the schematic here, this is your tone stack. So this is the treble pot, this is the bass pot, this is the middle pot. So it's very typical to see an effects loop come off the treble wiper, the middle lug of the treble pot, and make its way from the treble wiper out to the phase inverter. The double pole, double throw switch here, this is the effects loop on and off control. And you can see when the effects loop is off, the signal comes into the switch on one side, comes straight around and back out straight to the phase inverter and onto the power amp. Okay, so the effects loop is completely bypassed when the loop is out. So when we switch the loop on, these two switches here will go to the down position, and the signal comes off the treble wiper and makes its way into the send stage, out through the send jack, out through the effects loop here. So if you have got a delay or something connected, it'll be here. in this imaginary position in the middle, out of the output of the delay back into the effects return, into this recovery stage here, and out, back across here into the switch and out to the phase inverter. So just to break down what's going on here with these two triodes, you can see to get to the effects send jack, we're actually coming off the bottom of this triode. This is the cathode side, right? So this is the plate or the anode up here. This is the grid or the input, and this is the cathode down here. And tapping off through this capacitor here on the cathode side of the tube is what we call a cathode follower. And you'll see this a lot in Marshall style amps, you know, the 2203, 2204, 1987, 1959 Plexi, you know, the classic older Marshall style circuit, cathode follower based tone stack. So you'll often see these tone controls coming straight off a cathode follower setup like this, which in those older Marshalls was off V2. What this does is really set up the signal to be a low impedance style signal that will handle longer cable runs better. So typically through an effects loop, of course, you want to run it across, you know, 10 foot, 12 foot, 20 foot cable out to your, maybe to your pedal board and back again. The job of the cathode follower here is to set the signal up so that when it goes out through that send jack, it's not going to endure a lot of signal loss. And when it comes back in again, the job of this triode here is almost called like a recovery stage, right? It brings the signal back again through a traditional gain stage and boosts it back up so that it can be sent back to the phase inverter or through to the phase inverter at the same signal level as if it didn't actually go through the loop in the first place. So when you switch this back and forward, you should be able to achieve unity gain out through here, so that when you move the switch back and forward, you don't get a noticeable change in volume. The way that you control the level to the send jack is through the send pot here, right? So it's a 100k linear pot that's coming off this off the cathode of V5A, and you can control obviously how hot the signal is. Now, one issue with this that I've discovered through building these and fine tuning this loop is that the way this is drawn and the way that's set up, let's call it stock, is the signal coming straight off the treble wiper is hitting this grid of this tube. It's not been attenuated at all. Right? So if you're not careful, you can hit the grid of this tube with too hot a signal, and the tube just freaks out, right? You get all this kind of blocking distortion, and it sounds terrible. And this is really done this way because in these amps where if you do not implement a global master volume, all right, and the global master would normally come in here. So when it says to phase inverter input, the way I always wire these amps is I have a global master. So we come out of here into another global master pot before it then goes to the phase inverter. If you're running this straight to the phase inverter, then your channel volume is back up here in the circuit earlier. And it then becomes, that channel volume basically becomes a control for how hot the signal is as it comes into this tube. Now, typically that's kind of okay because these amps are so goddamn loud that you're not going to run the channel volume that high if you don't have a global master in place. When you do have the global master in place, if you're like me, you'll actually like the tone of the amp with these channel masters or these channel volumes running higher. So I typically would dial it in, with the channel volume at midday, at least, right? 5 out of 10, maybe 6 of 10. Because you get a hotter signal running through the final gain stage of the preamp. And if you do that, you really then need to attenuate this signal before it hits V5A. Okay, and if I move across, this is how I did it. And I'll show you the wiring of how to implement it in the actual amp in the last part of this clip. But if you set up a voltage divider here with a 220k and a 68k to ground, and you can play with these values to fine tune it, you'll be able to attenuate or reduce the level of the signal that's hitting this grid on V5A. And that works really nicely if you like to run your channel volumes, as I said, up at 5 or 6, and then use your global master to control the overall volume of the amp. Of course, the global master is after the effects loop, so it has no impact on what's going on here. Now, the other thing that's drawn in this version of the schematic is I've taken out the send and return pot. So what I wanted to do here is show a way of implementing this tube buffered effects loop if you do not have a send or return pot, either a send or a return pot set up. So again, I arrived at these values by using my oscilloscope with a test signal and trying to get the right balance of input gain through the loop, gain in the recovery stage, and getting it as balanced as I could so that when I switched the loop in and out, I was getting close to unity gain on the phase inverter here. Okay, so 62, again, these are just voltage dividers, right? You can think of two resistors like this with a link through the middle like that. It works the same way as a pot. It's exactly the same as a pot, actually, other than it's fixed, right? You can't adjust it on the fly, obviously. Same thing here, right? So 62 and 22k will again attenuate the signal that's going out to the effects send jack, and then the return stage. This 100k resistor to ground here is simply emulating what happens if you had this 100k return pot set at maximum. So you can imagine if this pot was set to max, the wiper is going to be sitting up here at the top, and you effectively got 100k to ground. Okay, so it's just replicating that. And I changed this 120k to ground here. I think in the stock circuit it's 10k. There we go. I changed it to 120 because I was just looking to maximize the amount of recovery gain I was getting here, so that I could get a nice balanced signal back out through into the phase inverter. So that's a way of doing it if you're not using send and return pots. I did implement this on the 50 watt amp that I featured at the beginning of this clip, but I ended up with this final design. I did put a send level pot in place on the back of the amp, and I found that this gave just the right level of flexibility, being able to completely control the level of the send. Just gave me the right kind of control and balance with the loop. I kept the attenuation in place, right, as I said, because I like to run my channel volumes hotter. I did need to attenuate the signal before it came in here. I left that in place. I've got my 100k send level here, and I did not implement the return pot. So I made this in a fixed arrangement, and through this recovery stage, the signal comes back out, back to the switch and out and into my global master volume. And by putting the global master volume here, it means that it's usable whether the loop is in or out, right? Which I think gives you the ultimate kind of flexibility with the amp. Anyway, guys, I hope that's made some sense and is helpful for understanding how these tube buffered loops work. All right, so lastly, let's just have a quick look at how I actually wired the loop in using the modified schematic, the very last version of it, where I was attenuating the signal coming into V5A. So here's our MC2 board here. These are, just to orientate yourself, this is the send jack for the effects loop. This is the return jack. This is our send level pot. Remember, I implemented just the send level, not the return level. And then over this side is the effects loop switch, in or out. So to trace the signal, again in reference to the schematic, this black wire coming underneath the board here, it's shielded coax. It's coming from the treble wiper, okay, which is obviously on the front of the chassis. Comes in to the middle lug of this switch, and when the effects loop is off, the double pole, double throw switch comes up here, and it's just bridged across. You can see there's a little bit of bus wire there that just connects to two terminals. Coming down to the middle, this middle lug on the other side of the switch, shielded coax again on here, and this travels again underneath the board and back out to the global master, which is that's also a pot on the front of the chassis. But when we switch the double pole, double throw the other way, so the loop is on, okay, we're going to come down here, follow this black wire, again shielded coax, one end of it is grounded, and it makes its way over here to the grid pin of V5A. Now underneath this red heat shrink you can just see there's a 220k resistor. Now remember, I wanted to set up a voltage divider here with a 220k and a 68k to ground. There's the 220, then it goes to the grid. This green wire comes off that grid pin as well, makes its way to the PCB, and here's the 68k, which again in the stock circuit is a 1 meg resistor, I believe. So you can see I've got a bit of flux here to clean up, but I was making these mods on the fly with the scope, but it doesn't impact the sound at all. So 220k into the grid, 68k to ground. There's our voltage divider, which is attenuating the level of the signal hitting the V5A. Okay, this is set up as a cathode follower. So this is the blue, this is the plate or the anode coming straight off the board. The yellow is the cathode, which comes down here into, there's the 100k to ground. And then from there, it makes its way through a 47 nanofarad cap and over to the SEN level pot. Okay, so here's our SEN level pot, and here's the input here. Again, shielded coax at one end of it is grounded over here. But here's the input to the SEN level pot, and this piece of black coax comes down here and is off the board, right? So again, off the cathode follower, through this capacitor, through this coax, into the input of the SEN pot. It's a 100k linear pot, right? And off the wiper, where we're now controlling the SEN level, it comes across here to this side of the return jack. Little trick here that's used with these clef jacks or these switching jacks, you might know, but when a 1/4 inch jack is not plugged into one of these jacks, the terminals here are connected, the ground and the tip. Now it's a great trick, because what happens is when there's nothing plugged into the return, it means that your signal will come in on this side and it's connected to this side, and this is the return back onto the board. So it just means that when you can turn the effects loop on, and even when there's no 1/4 inch cable that's connecting SEN to return, your amp will still work, because these switch jacks will take care of it. As soon as you plug a jack into the return, that link is broken. When it comes back in, right, it's going to then come in on here, and it's going to make its way across this shielded coax back to the PCB here. You can see hidden underneath this is 100k. That's a 100k resistor from tip to ground. That is just simulating the return level pot as if it was full on. Now, remember I mentioned that when we looked at the schematic, I didn't actually implement a return level pot with this build. So instead, I've got a 100k resistor straight to ground, which again simulates having the return pot there, but just on maximum. Okay, it makes its way back onto the board, where it then will come on to the grid of V5B, which is over here. which is the recovery stage for the loop. It re-amplifies the signal back to the level it was before it was attenuated to go out the send jack. And from there, it comes out of the board here on this shielded coax and makes its way back along the edge of the chassis here to the double pole, double throw switch, which then makes its way to the global master. And that's it, guys.